She was on her knees on a dirty restaurant floor, cradling a stranger's head while everyone else just stared and laughed. Nobody knew that the old woman trembling in her arms was about to change her life forever and destroy the lives of everyone who walked past. Hello friends, welcome to Stories by Jason. Before we start, please do not forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. Also, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The lunch rush at Bellini's Bistro on West 44th Street was the kind of chaos that made grown adults consider career changes. By 12:15 on a Tuesday, every table was full, the kitchen was running 15 minutes behind, and the air smelled like burnt garlic bread and barely contained stress. The hostess had called in sick. One of the line cooks was nursing a hangover, and Maya Rodriguez, 28 years old, 5'4", wearing a coffee stain on her white uniform that she'd been trying to hide with her order pad all morning, was somehow running 6 tables at once. She hadn't slept well, she rarely did anymore. Her daughter Lily was 7 years old and had recently been diagnosed with a moderate hearing impairment. The specialist appointments alone had swallowed 3 months of Maya's savings. The hearing aids they'd recommended cost more than Maya made in 2 months at Bellini's. Her landlord had already left 2 voicemails. Her car insurance was 2 weeks lapsed. And yet, every morning, she tied her dark hair back, pinned on her name tag, and walked through those glass doors with her chin up, because Lily needed her too, and because falling apart was a luxury she simply could not afford. "Table 9 needs their check," barked Derek, her shift manager, as he blew past her with a bus tray. "And table 4 is asking for you specifically, something about the wrong dressing." "I'll be right there," Maya said, already moving. She was halfway across the dining room, balancing 2 plates of chicken piccata and a side salad, when she heard it. A sound that cut right through the noise of the restaurant the way a scream cuts through a crowd. A sharp crack, then a soft, terrible thud. Maya spun. Near the entrance corridor between the coat check and the first row of tables, an elderly woman had fallen. She lay on the tiled floor in a crumpled heap, one arm stretched out as though reaching for something, her handbag scattered beside her, the contents rolling slowly across the floor, a small mirror, a folded handkerchief, a photograph. She was perhaps 75, maybe older. She wore a charcoal wool coat that had once been expensive. You could see it in the cut, in the buttons, in the fine weave, but it was worn now, just slightly, in the way that old elegance wears when it is no longer tended. Silver white hair, a fragile face, pale as paper, twisted in confusion and pain. For a moment, a long, horrible moment, nobody moved. 37 people in that restaurant. Diners in business suits checking their phones. A group of young women laughing over salads. A man in a corner booth who looked up, looked right at the old woman on the floor, and then looked back at his pasta. And then the laughter started, not from everyone but from enough. A ripple of nervous, dismissive chuckling. Someone muttered something. A woman at a nearby table pulled out her phone and started filming. One of the busboys near the kitchen peered through the service window, saw the scene, and said to the cook beside him, loud enough to carry, "Old lady can't handle herself." More laughter. Derek, the shift manager, appeared in the corridor, glanced at the woman, and then, astonishingly, said, loud enough for Maya to hear clearly, "Someone call the front desk. This is a liability issue." He walked back toward the kitchen. Maya had already put the plates down. She didn't think about it. She didn't calculate the consequences. She didn't glance at her tables or check whether Derek was watching. Something in her, something that had been forged in the years of holding it together, of being the only person who showed up, simply responded. She was on her knees before the woman had fully registered she was there. "Hey," Maya said softly. "Hey, I've got you, I'm right here, you're okay." Up close, the woman's eyes were a washed-out gray-blue, clouded with pain and something that looked very much like fear. Not just physical fear, the deep, hollow fear of someone who has been alone for a long time and has somehow come to expect that aloneness. As though she had already accepted, even before she finished falling, that no one would come. The shock on her face when Maya appeared beside her was the most heartbreaking thing Maya had ever seen. I'm sorry," the old woman whispered. Her voice was cultured, precise, with the faint ghost of a New England accent. "I don't know what happened. My legs just..." Don't apologize, Maya said firmly, gently. Don't you dare apologize. Can you feel your legs? Does anything feel broken? I don't think so. My hip, there's pain, but I don't think. Okay, good, I'm Maya. What's your name? Eleanor, a pause, barely a breath. Eleanor Whitmore. Eleanor, Maya repeated it warmly, like it mattered, like she mattered. I'm going to stay right here with you, Eleanor. I've got you. Someone's already called for help. She looked up sharply at the watching crowd. Has anyone called 911? She demanded. Silence. A few people looked at each other. The woman with the phone was still filming. Call 911. Right now, Maya said, not pleading, stating. Her voice had steel in it. Now, please. Someone finally moved. A man in a gray suit, the only one who seemed properly jolted by Maya's authority, pulled out his phone. Maya turned back to Eleanor. Tell me something, she said, in a low, gentle voice designed specifically to hold someone's attention and keep them calm. She had used this voice with Lily during nightmares. She used it now with the same instinct. Tell me something nice, something you like, while we wait. Eleanor blinked. The fear in her eyes receded just slightly, replaced by something surprised and wondering. Nobody spoke to her like that, not in a long time. I like gardens, she said after a moment. I had a garden once, roses mostly, white ones. White roses, Maya said. Those are the best kind, tell me about them. And there, on the cold tile floor of a busy restaurant, while diners finished their meals, and the woman with the phone kept filming and Derek lurked at the kitchen door wondering about liability, Maya Rodriguez held Eleanor Whitmore's hand and listened to her talk about roses. She stayed until the paramedics arrived. She held Eleanor's hand while they checked her vitals. She gathered the scattered contents of the handbag, the mirror, the handkerchief, the photograph, and tucked them carefully back inside. When they loaded Eleanor onto the stretcher, the old woman gripped Maya's wrist with surprising strength. Thank you, she said, and her voice broke on the second word. Thank you, dear. Maya squeezed her hand once hard. Then she stood up, straightened her uniform, and walked back to her tables. Derek docked her 20 minutes' pay for the delay. He also gave Table 9's tip to someone else, claiming Maya had abandoned them. She said nothing. She pocketed what was left of her earnings, finished her shift, and drove home through a gray afternoon to her daughter and her overdue bills and her small, stubborn life. She did not know yet what she had set in motion. She did not know yet that the woman with the phone had already posted the video, that it already had 400 views, that one of those views belonged to a man sitting in a glass tower 40 blocks away, who would see a thumbnail image of his mother's face twisted in pain on a restaurant floor, and feel the ground shift underneath everything he thought he knew. She didn't know any of that yet. She just went home and helped Lily with her homework, and made soup, and held her daughter close in the yellow light of their small kitchen. And the world quietly began to change. Maya went back to the hospital the next morning. She hadn't planned to, hadn't even fully consciously decided. She just found herself, at 8:15 on her day off, standing at the reception desk of St. Catherine's Medical Center on 51st, asking if an Eleanor Whitmore had been admitted. The nurse had looked at her strangely. Are you family? No, Maya said simply. I'm the one who stayed with her. Something in that answer, the plainness of it, the absolute lack of agenda, made the nurse pause, and then quietly give her the room number. Eleanor was awake, propped up on pillows, wearing a hospital gown that sat oddly against her air of old dignity. Her hip had been bruised badly, not broken, a small mercy. She had been kept for observation due to a blood pressure irregularity and signs of what the attending physician had gently described as significant fatigue and dehydration. In language Maya understood better from experience. Someone had not been eating enough, had not been resting, had perhaps not been looked after properly. Eleanor's face, when Maya appeared in the doorway, was extraordinary to witness. It cycled through a dozen things in about 2 seconds. Surprise, pleasure, confusion, something raw and defensive, like a creature unused to kindness flinching away from an outstretched hand, and finally, slowly, a softening. You came back, she said. I brought soup, Maya said, lifting the thermos she'd made at 5 that morning. And the crossword from this morning's paper, because hospital TV is terrible. Eleanor stared at her. Then she laughed, a real laugh, genuine and slightly rusty, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. "Sit down, dear," she said, "please." They talked for 2 hours. And somewhere in those 2 hours, between the soup and the crossword and the easy, unforced rhythm of a conversation between two people who recognized something lonely and resilient in each other, Maya began to understand that Millionaire Whitmore was one of the most alone people she had ever met. The clues were everywhere once you knew to look. The hospital room had no flowers, no cards, no personal effects beyond the handbag from yesterday. No one had called, according to the nurse Maya spoke to quietly in the hallway. No one had come. The emergency contact on Alina's intake form had been listed as her personal attorney, not a family member, not a friend, just a lawyer's office number. Alina spoke carefully around the subject of her family, artfully, the way someone speaks carefully around a wound, acknowledging its presence without pressing on it. She mentioned a son briefly, with a careful neutrality that was itself a kind of grief. She spoke of him the way people speak of someone they love deeply and have lost, except the losing hadn't been to death. It had been to something quieter, to busy schedules and long silences and the slow accumulation of excuses. She spoke of her husband, Charles, who had died 6 years ago. She spoke of the house in Connecticut that had been sold, of the garden with the white roses that had been paved over by the new owners to make a parking area for their cars. "I live in a service apartment now," she said matter-of-factly. "On the Upper West Side, it's very clean, very quiet." A pause, very quiet. Maya heard everything inside that repetition. She went back the next day, and the day after that. She wasn't sure when it became ritual, and then something more. She brought Lily once, cautiously, not wanting to impose, and Alina's face when she met the little girl was something Maya would carry for the rest of her life. Lily, who was fearless with strangers in the way that children sometimes are, had climbed directly onto the edge of the hospital bed and announced that Alina's hair was the most beautiful color she'd ever seen. "Like real silver," Lily said seriously. "Not fake silver, real." Alina had pressed her lips together. Her eyes had gone bright and wet, and she looked away for a moment, composing herself. "You have a very remarkable daughter," she told Maya. "I know," Maya said, and meant it with everything she had. What Maya didn't know, what she was only beginning to piece together from small things, was the full truth of Alina Whitmore's identity. She knew the name, vaguely, the way you know a name that's appeared on the edges of news articles you've half read. She knew Alina's son was someone important, but she hadn't connected the dots, hadn't Google searched, hadn't thought to. It wasn't relevant to who Alina was in that hospital room, an elderly woman, sharp-minded and warm-hearted, eating too little and speaking too carefully around the subject of loneliness. But the truth was building in the background, the way truths do. Alina Whitmore was the mother of Daniel Whitmore, founder and CEO of Whitmore Capital Group, a private equity firm valued at $11 billion. Forbes had run a profile on him 3 months prior. He had appeared on the cover of Bloomberg twice. He owned 4 homes across 3 continents and a private island off the coast of Greece. He had not visited his mother in 8 months. He had not called in 3. His assistant had sent flowers on her birthday, which was the kind of detail that tells you everything. The shocking truth wasn't that Alina had fallen in a restaurant. The truth was that a woman who had raised one of the most powerful men in the country had been eating alone, walking alone, and managing her health alone, and the only person who had noticed, who had stopped, who had stayed, was a waitress who could barely pay her own rent. Meanwhile, back at Bellini's, the consequences of Maya's choice were arriving. The video had gone up 4 days ago. By now it had nearly 40,000 views, not viral, not yet, but building. Most of the comments were gentle, people praising the waitress, calling her an angel, tagging their friends. Some were angry, calling out the people who had filmed and laughed, naming the restaurant by name. Derek had seen the comments. Derek had not liked them. On Thursday, Maya arrived for her shift and was called into the small, airless office near the stock room. "We're reducing your hours," Derek said, not meeting her eyes. "Restructuring the schedule, it's nothing personal." It was absolutely personal, and they both knew it. "You're cutting me for kneeling down to help an old woman," Maya said quietly. "I'm restructuring the schedule," Derek repeated. His jaw was tight. He was embarrassed and defensive and had too little self-awareness to recognize those feelings. "Okay," Maya said. She did not beg. She did not argue. She turned and walked out. And if her hands were shaking slightly as she untied her apron, if her eyes burned on the bus ride home, she held herself upright the whole way. She had Lily's specialist appointment next week. She had a grocery bill due. She had the particular specific dread of someone who has run the numbers in their head so many times they can feel the deficit like a physical weight. But she also had the memory of Eliner's face, of Eliner laughing, of Eliner calling Lily remarkable. And she held on to that. She didn't know that the video, still building views, was about to be seen by someone who would shatter the careful quiet of his $11 billion life with a single 30-second clip of his mother on a restaurant floor. She didn't know that the shock was coming. She didn't know any of it yet. Daniel Whitmore did not watch viral videos. He was 51 years old, accustomed to controlling every variable in his environment, and profoundly skilled at insulating himself from the unpredictable noise of the internet. He had social media managers and communications directors, and a personal assistant named Claire who filtered his incoming information with the precision of someone defusing a bomb. He did not scroll. He did not browse. He made decisions that moved markets and people, and then he moved on. So it was a specific cruelty that fate engineered the exact circumstance that put the video in front of him. It was a Friday morning. He was in his car, the black Bentley, heading from his Tribeca penthouse to his Midtown office. He was reviewing a merger document on his phone, and Claire had sent a message ahead of it. "Heads up, video circulating relevant to you personally. Thought you should see it before it gets larger." He opened the link. The video was not professionally filmed. It was shot from across the restaurant, on someone's phone, slightly shaky. The audio was restaurant noise, clinking, voices, kitchen sounds. And there, in the corridor near the entrance, a woman in a white waitress uniform was kneeling on the floor. She was cradling the head and shoulders of an older woman who had clearly just fallen. Daniel leaned forward. The quality wasn't great. The angle was partial, but the silver-white hair, the charcoal wool coat with the distinctive row of buttons his mother had bought in London 15 years ago and never stopped wearing, the precise way her hand reached up and held onto the arm of the woman kneeling with her. His mother gripped things that way. He'd watched her grip the railing of their sailboat in Connecticut the same way when he was 10 years old. He had forgotten that detail until this exact moment. His stomach dropped through the floor of the car. He watched the waitress speak to his mother, gently, closely, with full, undivided attention. He watched her look up and demand that someone call 911, her voice carrying even through the poor audio. He watched her gather the contents of his mother's scattered handbag, piece by piece, with the same carefulness you would use for something precious. He watched the people around her do nothing. He watched one woman keep filming. He watched a man in a manager's uniform appear in the background, look at the scene, and walk away. His mother on the floor of a restaurant, alone except for a stranger. His mother being cared for by someone who had absolutely no reason to care, while people with every reason to help stood around with their phones and their laughter. He watched the video 3 times. By the 3rd time, his jaw was clenched so tightly his teeth ached. By the 3rd time, something was moving through him that he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Something that combined grief and rage and a deep, self-directed shame that cut far worse than anger at anyone else could. "Turn around," he said to his driver. "Sorry." Turned the car around. "We're going to St. Catherine's Medical Center on 51st. He had known his mother had been admitted. Claire had told him briefly, 4 days ago, "Your mother had a minor fall, admitted for observation. Hip bruised but not broken, comfortable and stable." And he had sent flowers and instructed Claire to arrange the best possible care, and told himself he would call once he'd finished the Thursday board call. He had not called. He had not gone. He had told himself that she was fine, that the doctors were handling it, that he would visit soon, that she would understand. Standing in the elevator of St. Catherine's 4 minutes later, hands shoved in his coat pockets, Daniel Whitmore understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that he had been telling himself those things for 8 months, maybe longer. That soon had been his answer to everything regarding his mother for longer than he could precisely account for. That somewhere in the construction of his enormous, busy, successful life, he had allowed the person who had given him that life to recede to the edges of it, and had been comfortable there, because she never complained, because she was proud and self-contained, because she had never once asked him for anything. He had mistaken her silence for contentment. The truth, walking down the hospital corridor toward her room, was sitting in his chest like a stone. He stopped outside her door. Through the small rectangular window he could see her. She was sitting up, reading an actual paper book, one she must have asked someone to bring. She looked smaller than he remembered, older, but her posture was still impeccable, still the posture of a woman who had been taught that dignity was not optional. Beside her in the visitor's chair sat a young woman with dark hair tied back, wearing jeans and a jacket, with a little girl asleep against her shoulder. The waitress from the video. Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment, unseen. He watched his mother look up from her book at the young woman. He watched her say something quietly, and the young woman smile. He watched his mother, his reserved, careful, self-contained mother, reach out and gently brush a strand of hair from the sleeping child's face with a tenderness that made his throat close entirely. He had not seen his mother look at anyone that way in years. Perhaps ever. He knocked and pushed the door open. Eleanor looked up. Her expression traveled through surprise and pleasure, and something complicated, love and grief, and the careful pride of a woman who does not want anyone to see how much she has missed them. "Daniel," she said, as though he appeared regularly, as though it had not been 8 months. "Mom," he said. His voice came out wrong, thick, cracked in the middle. The young woman had straightened immediately, instinctively recognizing him. He could see it in her eyes, and her arms had tightened around the sleeping child, protective and uncertain. "This is Maya," Eleanor said, with a calm that was somehow the most devastating thing in the room. "And her daughter Lily. Maya is the one who stayed with me when I fell." A pause. "She's been here every day." Every day. He looked at Maya Rodriguez for a long moment. She looked back at him with dark, steady eyes that held no awe and no agenda. Just the look of someone who had done the right thing and was comfortable with that. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said. He sat down. He stayed for 3 hours. He and his mother talked, really talked, the way they hadn't in years, and some of it was painful, and some of it was long overdue, and all of it was necessary. Maya and Lily slipped out after 40 minutes, quietly giving them the space, but before she left, Maya had reached down and squeezed Eleanor's hand once, exactly as she had on the restaurant floor. Eleanor watched her go. "She reminds me of you," Eleanor said when the door had closed. "When you were young, before everything became so important." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. But outside the glass building, the video had crossed 200,000 views. A journalist at the Times had recognized Eleanor from an old society photograph. The story was being written. The restaurant had been identified. The names of people who had filmed and laughed were being surfaced in comment threads. And in a small apartment on the Lower East Side, Maya Rodriguez didn't know any of this yet, was simply making dinner and thinking about her daughter's appointment and the gap in her schedule where her shifts used to be. The thunder was coming. She just couldn't hear it yet. Back at Bellini's, Derek had a very different evening. By 5 p.m., the restaurant's Yelp page had been flooded with 1-star reviews citing the video. By 7, a reporter had called the front desk. By 9, the owner, a man named Sal Benedetti who had built his restaurant over 30 years and cared very much about reputation, had watched the video himself and called Derek into his office. "Who cut her hours?" Sal said. "I restructured the schedule." "Who is the woman in this video?" A pause. "Maya Rodriguez." "Did she do anything wrong?" "She abandoned her tables." "Did she do anything wrong?" Derek had no answer. Sal Benedetti was 63 years old and had grown up watching his grandmother work 2 jobs to support 8 children. He recognized certain things. "Get her number," he said, "tonight." The world was tilting on its axis. And the most shocking truth was still 24 hours away. The call from Sal Benedetti came on a Saturday morning, while Maya was braiding Lily's hair. She almost didn't pick up, didn't recognize the number. But something made her answer, the same instinct that had made her kneel down on that restaurant floor, and Sal's voice came through, uncomfortable and unvarnished. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is Sal, the owner of Bellini's. I want to apologize, and I want to offer you your job back with the wages you're owed and a raise, and I'm handling Derek myself." Maya was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate that," she said carefully. "I'll think about it." She hadn't said yes. She hadn't said no. She promised Lily pancakes and tried to feel the ground under her feet. She was still trying when the second call came, an hour later. It was a number she didn't recognize either, a Manhattan area code, clean and impersonal. She picked up. "Ms. Rodriguez." The voice was measured, precise, with something carefully controlled underneath it. She recognized it immediately from the hospital room. "This is Daniel Whitmore. I'd like to speak with you if you have time. I'd like to do that in person if you're willing, with my mother present." There was a pause. "She asked for you specifically," he added, and his voice fractured almost imperceptibly on that sentence. "She said she wouldn't meet without you." Maya closed her eyes briefly. "Okay," she said, "tell me where." They met that afternoon in a private dining room at a hotel not far from the hospital, clean and quiet, nothing ostentatious, which Maya suspected was a deliberate choice. Eleanor was there already, dressed properly now, upright and composed in a pale blue blazer, looking more herself. Her eyes lit the moment Maya walked in. Lily, who had come because there was no one else to watch her, and because Eleanor had explicitly invited her, made a beeline directly for Eleanor and presented her with a hand-drawn card that read, in Lily's careful 7-year-old print, "Dear Eleanor, I hope your hip feels better soon. You have beautiful hair. Love, Lily." Eleanor held the card for a long time. She did not say anything. She didn't need to. Daniel Whitmore sat across the table from Maya, and with the particular awkwardness of a man accustomed to controlling every room, finding himself in one where control was beside the point, attempted to explain himself. "I want to be honest with you," he said. "I don't want this to be something transactional. I don't want you to feel like you're being paid off or handled." "Then don't handle me," Maya said simply. He looked at her for a moment. Then something in his face relaxed slightly, like a knot loosening by 1 degree. "My mother has been alone," he said. "I told myself she was fine. I told myself she was independent. I told myself the arrangement worked for her because she never told me otherwise." He paused. "I didn't ask. I should have asked." "Yes," Maya said, "you should have." She hadn't planned to say it. She hadn't prepared a speech or a confrontation. But the truth was plain, and he had asked for honesty, and she was constitutionally incapable of prettifying things. He took it without flinching. "I'm going to fix that," he said. That part is about my mother and me. That's ours to work on." He glanced at Eleanor, something passing between them that was private and old. "But I also want to, I've been told about your situation, about your daughter, about what you've been dealing with, and I want to." "You don't owe me anything," Maya said. "I know I don't," he said it steadily. "That's not what this is. You didn't help my mother because you expected a reward. I'm aware of that. I'm not offering you one." A pause. "I'm offering you something different. I'm offering you an opportunity. Because I've spent a long time assessing people's character, and I know what I saw in that video, and I know what my mother has told me about you, and I don't encounter that quality very often. In anyone." Maya was quiet. Eleanor, who had been listening with the attentiveness of someone who has thought about this for days, reached across the table and covered Maya's hand with her own. "He's not very good at saying simple things," Eleanor said with gentle amusement. "What he means is, Lily's medical care will be handled completely as a gift, not a loan, not a debt, a gift. And there is a position available if you want it, managing community outreach for the Whitmore Foundation. Real work, real pay, good hours, something that will matter." Maya looked at Eleanor, then at Daniel, then at Lily, who was showing Eleanor her drawings and explaining each one with solemn seriousness, and Eleanor was listening to every word as though they were the most important words she had ever heard. She thought about the hospital room, about the crossword puzzles, about white roses in a Connecticut garden that had been paved over. She thought about Derek, about the restaurant floor, about 37 people who had done nothing. She thought about Lily's hearing aids and the specialist appointment, and the 2 voicemails from her landlord. She thought about the fact that the only currency she'd had to offer the world, for as long as she could remember, was the willingness to show up, to stay, to be the person who knelt down. "Okay," she said quietly, "yes." The video had, by that morning, crossed 4 million views. The journalist's piece in the Times had run that Friday, a careful, well-researched story about the incident, about the restaurant, about the identity of the elderly woman, about the waitress who had stopped. It was titled, simply, "The Ones Who Stay." It had been the most shared article on the platform for 36 hours. Derek was no longer employed at Bellini's. The woman who had filmed and laughed rather than helping had received a message from her own employer, a public relations firm, which had its own ideas about the public image of its staff, suggesting she take some time away to reflect. She had issued a public apology that satisfied no one and pleased no one and was, Maya felt, probably sincere enough, in the rueful way that people are sorry when they are caught. 3 other diners who had done nothing had written private letters to the restaurant, expressing regret. One had included a donation to a local seniors charity in Aliner's name. None of that erased what had happened, but something about it mattered, the acknowledgement, the record being set straight. Justice, Maya had found, rarely arrived as a thunderclap. More often it arrived like this, slowly, in pieces, incomplete but real. Not enough to undo the wrong, but enough to make the landscape different going forward. In the weeks that followed, Maya started the foundation job. She was terrified on the first day and competent by the second and genuinely good at it within a month. She had a talent for people that no office job could have revealed, that the restaurant had used and undervalued, the ability to listen, really listen, to understand what someone needed when they couldn't say it clearly, to stay in the room when staying was uncomfortable. The Foundation's community programs for elderly isolation, a cause Aliner had quietly pushed for years, without much traction, suddenly gained momentum and funding, and the attention of people who could make things happen. Lily's hearing aids were fitted in November. She cried the first time she could hear clearly, a sudden rush of the world in high definition that overwhelmed her small body. And Maya held her in the audiologist's office and cried too, not bothering to hide it, not bothering to be composed. Aliner came to the fitting. She sat in the corner of the room and watched and made no fuss and said nothing, and afterward in the parking lot she said to Maya, "I want to be her grandmother, if you'll allow it. I know I have no claim to it, but I want to ask." Maya had to look away for a moment. "She already calls you that," she said when she could speak. "I didn't correct her, I didn't know if I should." Aliner pressed her lips together, nodded once, very precisely, composed herself with the elegant efficiency of a woman who has been composing herself her whole life. "Good," she said, "good." Daniel Whitmore took 3 weeks of largely unscheduled time that autumn, the most unscheduled he'd been since his 20s. He flew to wherever his mother was. He called more than he visited, and he visited more than he had in years. It was uncomfortable and necessary, and he was not good at it immediately, but he got better. Aliner never said, "I told you so." She never said, "It took you long enough." She never leveraged his guilt, never cataloged his absences. She just let him be present, as though presence were simply the natural state of things, as though it had always been available, and he had only just learned to use it. He brought her flowers once, white roses, the kind she'd mentioned in the Times article. She put them in a vase on the windowsill of the service apartment, and stood looking at them for a long moment. "I'm going to find a house," she said finally, "something with a garden." "I know a good property on the Connecticut shore," he said. "I know," she said. "I already have the plans drawn." He laughed, fully, genuinely, in a way he hadn't in quite a while. "Of course you do," he said. The house in Connecticut, smaller than the one she'd sold, but right, proportioned correctly for a life rather than a performance, had a south-facing garden. She planted white roses in the spring. The first ones bloomed in early June, and she sent Maya a photograph of them. White petals, dark leaves, morning light. No caption. None was needed. Maya kept the photograph on her desk at the foundation. She thought sometimes about the moment before she'd knelt down. That fraction of a second on the restaurant floor when she'd been aware of the plates in her hands, the tables waiting, Derek watching, the docked pay coming, the 37 people doing nothing. That moment when it would have been so easy, so rational, even to keep walking. She thought about what Lily had once asked her, months later, having heard pieces of the story. "Mom," Lily had said, with the directness that children use when they are asking the only question that matters, "why did you stop, when nobody else did?" Maya had thought about it genuinely. "Because she was there," she'd said finally. "She was there and she needed help and I was there, that's all." Lily had thought about that for a moment. "That's enough, though," she'd said seriously. "Yes," Maya had said, "that's enough." There was no dramatic ending, no single moment of perfect justice, no villain hauled away in handcuffs, no scene where the right words were said at exactly the right time in exactly the right way. Life doesn't usually give you that. What it gives you, if you're lucky, is this: a garden beginning to grow, a little girl hearing clearly, an old woman in a window with white roses, a man learning late, imperfectly, sincerely, how to show up, and a woman who had always shown up, finally being shown up for. That's not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. 14 months after the day Alina fell, the Whitmore Foundation launched its National Stay With Me initiative, a program pairing volunteers with isolated elderly individuals in 47 cities. Maya Rodriguez was named the program's founding director. At the launch event, in a hotel ballroom that was a great deal fancier than anything she'd ever stood in before, someone handed her a microphone and asked her to say a few words. She thought of the restaurant floor, the cold tile, the scattered handbag, the 37 people who kept walking. "I want to say something to anyone who has ever walked past someone who needed help," she said. "I'm not here to shame you. I've been tired too. I've been running too. I know what it feels like when you tell yourself someone else will stop." She paused. "But I want to tell you that the decision to stop, to kneel down, to stay, to hold someone's hand, that decision doesn't cost you as much as you think it will, and it gives back more than you will ever be able to calculate." She looked out at the room. "Stay with people, that's all, just stay." The room was very quiet. Then Alina Whitmore, sitting in the front row with Lily Rodriguez asleep on her shoulder, began to applaud. And the room followed. A woman who couldn't even afford her daughter's hearing aids, who was one missed shift away from a crisis, got down on her knees on a cold restaurant floor, held a stranger's hand and stayed, while 37 other people walked past, while someone filmed and laughed, while the manager walked away to check on liability. Maya didn't know who Alina was. She didn't do it for a reward. She did it because a human being needed help, and she was human enough to answer. And I need to ask you something directly. When was the last time you were Maya? And when were you one of the 37? Because I think most of us have been both. I think most of us have had that moment, that exact fraction of a second, when we could have stopped and didn't. When we told ourselves someone else would handle it. When being tired, or late, or unseen made walking past feel like the only option. This story doesn't let us off the hook, and that's exactly why it matters. If this story moved you, if it hit something real, if it made you think of someone you've been meaning to call, someone you've been meaning to check in on, someone who might be sitting in a quiet apartment telling themselves they're fine, then do something with that feeling right now, before it fades. Smash that like button if you believe that one act of kindness can change everything, because Maya's story is proof that it can. Drop a comment below that says, "I'll stay." 2 words. That's all, as a promise to yourself that the next time someone needs you to kneel down, you will. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this one. We find the real ones. The true stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the moments nobody is watching. They deserve to be seen. You deserve to see them. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, someone who's been walking past their own version of Alina, someone who needs to be reminded that showing up matters, share this video with them right now. Don't wait. Don't tell yourself you'll do it later. Because later is what the 37 people said. You're not them. Subscribe, stay, show up.